We'll now take a look at a very important type of method, which we call the constructor. Every class is going to have this special type of method that we call a constructor. This method, it has the same name as the class, and it executes automatically when an object of the class is created. So whenever we create an object of a class, this method is automatically called. You have no control over it. You have to have it in there. It's always going to have the same name as the name of the class, and it's just automatically called whenever we use that class. And what this method does, it just simply forces our instance variables to be initialized. So if we're going to create an object of the class and we have these instance variables, we need to initialize them to something. So this constructor allows us to make sure that our instance variables are initialized before we do something with them. Now there are two different types of constructors that we need to consider. There are constructors that have parameters that we can pass with them, and there are constructors where there are no parameters that are passed. Now the constructor that doesn't have parameters is what we call a default constructor, and we'll see some examples of both of these constructors later on. Now constructors have the following properties. Some of them are just kind of repeats from what we just said earlier, but it's really important to mention these different properties. So first, the name of the constructor is the name of the class. So every class must have a constructor, and that name is always going to be whatever your class name is. The next one is actually very important, and a lot of people forget. There is no return type for the constructor, not even a void type, okay? So I'm not even saying you can't have public void and then your constructor name. Can't do that. It's just going to be public and then the name of your constructor. So we're intentionally omitting the return type. So it can't be an int or a double or string or a void. It's nothing there, completely empty. Constructors can be overloaded. So if we mentioned we just said there are two different types of constructors, the ones with parameters and ones without parameters. The names are going to be the same, but so we can have multiple constructors and they all must have the same names. It's just that their parameter lists are different. So that's the definition of an overloaded method. The constructor runs automatically when we create the object. So what we're saying is we can't call them just like other methods. As soon as we create the object, the constructor is automatically called. We can't manually call the constructor. It's just kind of forced on us. And if we have multiple constructors, whichever one that we run just depends on the parameters. So once again, it's just like with overloaded methods. When we call a method that's overloaded, we pick the one that matches the parameter list that we're trying to use. In our clock example, we're going to create two different constructors. We're going to have a default constructor and a constructor that has parameters. So here's what our default constructor would look like. And as I said, notice that there is nothing here between public and clock. There is nothing. There's no int, no void. We're not going to have any return type. Now the default constructor is going to initialize all of our instance variables to 0. So it's going to initialize the hour, the minute, and second to 0. Here's our second constructor, and this is going to have parameters. So we have parameters for hours, minutes, and seconds. So you might notice it looks very similar to our set time method, and that's intentional. You'll see how that comes in handy later on, but this is simply going to initialize the instance variables to the values of these parameters. And once again, as we see here, it's just public clock. There's nothing in between it. Now, what if you decide to not create a constructor? Well, in Java, it'll automatically provide a default constructor. And this constructor will just initialize all your instance variables to a default value based on its type. So like, for example, if we have integer values, they'll be initialized to 0. It's usually better to just create your own constructor. That way you can decide how the instance variables are going to be initialized. But just the rule of thumb is always make sure you include a constructor in your class.